All right. Good evening, everybody. We are back for our Thursday night book review, part 5. Just give everybody a second. All right. If this is your first time joining us here, I am author Nick Belisi. I have written 2 books now. My first book being The Souls of Paradise. The second book being Paradise Reborn. So what we do on these Thursday night reviews is that we talk about my book and stuff like that. We go chapter by chapter and we talk about like little hidden Easter eggs and such. So with us leaving off last week, we did chapters 6 and 7. I promised you guys earlier in the week that we'd be doing chapters 8, 9, and 10 this week. Since they are shorter chapters, we'll be able to, jump on and, do a little bit more. Okay, so to get us started, our first chapter we're talking about tonight is chapter 8. It's called Public Opinion. Hi, Alana. So, in chapter 8, Public Opinion, basically what happens is, in the last chapter we talked about, Stella was talking about how she was going to see her ex-boyfriend, her sister's ex-boyfriend, Patrick, at the high school the next day. So now she wakes up and she's boarding the bus to head over towards the school. And when she gets to the school, she winds up finding Patrick. She's looking for him throughout the hallways. When she does finally find him, she freaks out on him. They get into a little scuffle. And basically what winds up happening is that she passes out from everything that's going on. So there's not many Easter eggs in these 3 chapters, but when Stella is on the bus, she actually winds up yelling at one of the kids because of the way that they're looking at her and stuff like that. So it was actually a nod in the book on page 71. She says exactly, let me see. So what she says on page 71 is that she goes, "You guys have something you want to say?" And one of the boys sat up from the seat and he called her a freak. So she took a couple of steps forward, feeling her anger taking control, and she screams, "You want me to pull your scrawny ass off the bus and beat you onto the sidewalk till you can no longer function?" So that was actually a nod to a movie I saw a while back with Nicolas Cage called Matchstick Men. And when he's having, when he's having one of his freakouts and stuff like that, he screams like, "Oh, do you want me to drag you outside and beat you till you piss blood?" And that's where I actually got that from. So I just changed it up just a little bit. But it was a good movie that me and my cousin watched a lot when we were younger. So I just gave a nod to that. So in that, before Stella enters the actual school, she's talking about how she is nervous about going inside and stuff like that. So she sits down at like a little picnic table like near the school, and she has a cigarette and stuff before she goes in. And that was actually a nod to like my school, because the school when I was making it in the story was modeled after the school that I attended in high school. And what we used to do is like after school or something like that, like some of us, we would go down to what they called the pit, and it was like a little area right outside the school behind like the track and stuff like that. And we would all go down there and smoke cigarettes and hang out and stuff. So I actually gave a nod to that because of that. So like I said, when I was writing the book, I was modeling it in my head, I'm talking about how she's navigating it, going to the cafeteria and stuff like that. It was actually from the high school that I attended. So, Stella's also talking about like the good times when she went to school and stuff like that. And she is saying, that, her group of friends was called the Outcasts, but that was like another nod to my group of friends, because when we grew up and stuff like that, we called ourselves the Pisaki Posse. And we all wound up getting these tattoos. And, a little funny story, we figured out pretty early on how to do tattooing and stuff like that, because obviously we weren't old enough to go and get professional tattoos. So we were doing, what is known as like jailhouse tattoos. Somebody figured out that you could take Indian ink and like a sewing needle and stuff like that, and you can kind of poke out a design. So, my whole group of friends and stuff like that, we all got the same tattoo, but we didn't want our parents to see it and stuff like that. So we all wound up getting the letters P and P, again, for Pisagi Posse, because that was the street we grew up on and hung out. What we didn't realize at the time, which is kind of like a stupid joke now, is that we all got it on our foot, and somebody pointed out, and they're like, you have PP on your foot. So, like, I didn't really think that one through, but that is where that little nod came from. That's really all there was Easter egg wise for chapter 8. This part of the book, it's kind of like leading up to the more extreme things. So there's not a whole lot to talk about as far as in chapter 8. Stella basically gets her bearings together. She confronts Patrick. Patrick really doesn't want anything to do with her, so he kind of brushes her off, and then she collapses. So now that brings us into chapter 9, which is called Back to School, where she like is in that dreamlike state again. And she awakes in that dreamlike state, and she's surrounded by all these like different monsters and stuff like that. So she runs into like the office, and when she gets into the office, that's when she first encounters one of the main monsters of this book called Whiteface. And as she's like getting away from him and stuff, she manages to throw over a like filing cabinet and just happens to catch out of the corner of her eye some paperwork that she saw her sister's name on and stuff. And when she read it, she noticed that Patrick had put a restraining order out on her sister. And, she had no idea, as she says, that, like, any of this was going on. She thought her and Patrick were fine, but now it's starting to really come together. There was a lot more issues going on behind the scenes. In that, she's running. She actually winds up running into Whiteface again, and she thinks she's about to be killed by him. But, a white blast kind of sends it into oblivion, and then that's when she knocks back out again. So with that being said, couple things that were in it. So she's talking about, she just happened to find, while she's in like this dreamlike state, she happened to find like a light flickering, like a little flashlight and stuff. She picks up, she's hitting it. So it was a nod to basically like any like classic horror and stuff like that. You'll see like the flashlight, it never works, you're always just banging it and stuff like that. It's also a nod to one of my favorite franchises, Silent Hill, because the two closest things in my life when I was growing up, obviously my daughter is now, but like as I was growing up, like my two biggest things were, I had home, New Jersey, and then I had Silent Hill. So those were the two closest things to my heart at that point in my life when I was writing this and stuff. So I wanted to give a little nod to, one of the greatest horror things that I've ever seen, which is Silent Hill. Whiteface was actually inspired by a nightmare I had. It was a very, very strange nightmare, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I just had to jot it down. And, when I wrote it down, I envisioned, like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with, like, Japanese anime or anything, but, like, a Japanese no mask and stuff like that. It's like that white mask. It doesn't really have a lot of features and stuff to it, but I wanted to do that because, as I explained earlier, there's the different things she's experiencing and stuff, which when we get to the end of the story, I'll go into more detail, because those of you who haven't read it yet, I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but there's reasons why she's seeing these monsters and stuff like that, and why she's going through this stuff. So, the Broken, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, where Stella basically sees herself with like a porcelain mask on and stuff like that. It's a different variation of Stella, and basically the Broken is her innocence, and it's being destroyed. Like, she's essentially destroying her innocence. So, when you see Whiteface, to come to, like, realize as the story goes on, which you'll run into Whiteface again, it's the emptiness that she feels. And, people with borderline and stuff like that, it's like a very common thing, is the emptiness. So, it's the emptiness, but then also, that emptiness turns into rage. So, when we get into, I believe it's like about 3 or 4 more chapters from now, so next week's thing, we'll talk more about Whiteface, because that's when, you start really getting the heavy dialogue and stuff between Stella and— so that basically is the the outline of chapter 9, Stella, when she collapses, that white light kind of sends it through. And the reason being is because, like I said, without giving too much away, the medication she's taking and stuff like that, what it's doing is it's taking the darkness and stuff inside of her, and it's basically like almost erasing it. So, as these like horrible things that she's been keeping inside of her start conjuring back up, the medication is actually the white light that's erasing all that darkness from her. But she sees it as Cecile because that's like the light in her life. It's like the only thing that she really had that was good. So every time these like horrible things are being erased within her mind or pushed to the side or suppressed by the medication, that white light in itself is Cecile to her, but it is the medication that's ultimately doing this, which when we dive deeper into what PC3 is all about and stuff, it'll make a lot more sense. It's not supposed to make sense this early on in the book. It's supposed to still keep you intrigued so you don't know what's going on. Like, why is she seeing this stuff? Why is she going into these dreamlike states? It is actually indeed the medication, because if you notice, before she goes into these things, she's taking the medication. So that basically wraps up chapter 9 as far as, like little details and such. Now, to go into chapter 10, because I did promise, 3 chapters tonight. So going into chapter 10, that is called Nurse to Life. Now, this is where we're going to meet one of my other favorite characters that I've gotten a lot of good feedback from people too, Nurse Betty. And this is the very first time she's introduced in the story, but it won't be the last because she does make a reappearance in the second book. So, Nurse to Life, Stella basically wakes up in the nurse's office within the school, and she's, having her initial communication with Betty. She talks about her relationship with Betty from when she was in school, and she was constantly, like, ditching class and stuff like that. And she would, like, hide out in the nurse's office to, like, get a note so she wouldn't have to do swimming or gym class or whatever the case may be. So they have their little banter that goes back and forth, and then, she asks her, hey, did you know anything about my sister possibly having a restraining order with Patrick and all that stuff? And, Betty kind of confirms that, yeah, that is legitimate, and, that did happen. So, after that, Stella gets out of the school, and then she catches a bus to go home, to go home and see her dad. And in her mind, she wants to talk to him about it, but obviously she's afraid to bring it up because she feels like if she does, it's going to send him over the edge. Now, Nurse Betty, I didn't model after anybody in particular. I knew I wanted to find like a soft and caring older woman, that Stella had somewhat of a bond to. Not like a super close bond in this point in time, but, later when we get into the second book, if you haven't read it already, you're going to see that Stella had a lot more impact on people in the community than is let on in this book, because this is being told from the point of view of Stella, so, most people aren't talking about like, well, this person likes me, this person likes me, this person likes me, but when you see it, because the second book is from the point of view of Gwen, that is when you start to piece together, the relationship and the impact that Stella had on the actual community. So, basically Betty is just a school nurse, but she does have a good relationship with Stella. She does care about her. She hasn't seen her in such a long time, but, they do have a very good relationship. Now, I was going to read a little bit of the book. If you guys haven't read it yet, you could always follow along with me if you have it, or, maybe this will show you basically what we're working with. So I'll read a little bit, and I'll explain why. So this is Stella talking, and she says, "Every once in a while I would open my eyes ever slightly to glance out the window. The scenic view of the beautiful town provided me with such comfort. The beautiful autumn trees surrounding the town as the leaves slowly fell along the streets. Each leaf peacefully dancing in the wind like the final performance just for me before its inevitable fate with the world below. The wind had a slight breeze, not enough to cause a chill, but enough to move the trees slightly. The crisp smell of fireplaces burning always reminded me of fall nights, huddled up by the campfire, having the best times without a care in the world. Everything still seemed in front of us, and we didn't have to have a single care. You spend your whole life wishing to grow up faster, and when you finally do, all you want to do is rewind back time. The glamour of adult life isn't as great as it seems. You think being an adult comes with all this freedom, but if anything, you become more of a slave to the system, constantly in fear of how you're going to survive. There's no safety net anymore, and you're expected to get a job and provide something to society. We're all gears in the grand scheme of things, each pulling our way for the overall good. Each person designated a task to keep the economy afloat. We're the never-ending cogs turning untampered for a common goal. You work, sleep, and try to find your kicks somewhere in between. All the while, you're up to your eyeballs in debt, fighting week to week to stay above the rising tide. The adult relationships become more complex and the divorce rate is higher than before. Couples abandon ship at the first sign of controversy, leaving the children caught in the wake of its emotional destruction. I never knew what happened to my mother other than that she just wasn't around. My father never talked about her and I never really asked. It wasn't something that interested me. I knew that if I ever became a mother that I would be nothing like her. I would never abandon my children like she did. The guilt of feeling that you made them run away is everlasting, even though you know it wasn't you. It's one of the coldest things you could do to someone. A child is innocent and has the whole world in front of them. The parents are supposed to teach them and love them and show them compassion and show them how to live a happy life. Walking out of a child's life without even a slight explanation just shows you have no empathy or compassion, especially to do it to something you created. How could you be so heartless? The thought of it made me never question what happened to her. In my mind, if she didn't care enough about us to even say goodbye, then why should I waste even a single thought on someone like that? It's not worth the aggravation, and there are so many more pressing things in life. Although I felt guilty, I wasn't going to let someone like that ruin my life or even define who I am. The bus was rounding the turnaround, and it would only be another 15 minutes until my stop. I kept hoping that Dad would be okay, and when I got home and could for once put his stuff aside and hear my problems. I have this lifelong gratitude towards him as he raised us. He didn't just get up and walk out on us. He stayed and showed us love and supported us. He used to work a lot, so it's not as if he had all the time in the world to take us places, but he did show his love just by providing. As a child, I would try to spend time with him, but he would almost always be too tired. Our night mostly consisted of movies or just being home. I didn't understand it when I was younger, and I just assumed he didn't like us, but as I grew up, I began to feel how he did when he would come home from a long day at work. Dad had his way of adequating love with money. He would give us stuff and we need to keep us in a nice neighborhood, but as far as showing us affection, it just wasn't present. If we can get him to crack a smile when we did something good, that would become a sufficient enough validation that we were doing something right. Now, that's not to say we never had fun, but I'm speaking on day-to-day lifestyle. I was asked once in a while in group therapy to recall a happy moment from my childhood, and it shocked me to realize that nothing positive came to mind. I actually tried to visualize something, but I just couldn't play out a single memory. I could think of many things that happened, but none were positive, and it made me realize that maybe I didn't have the picture-perfect childhood. Dad never saddled us with a stepmom, although I had heard around town there were plenty of women that were interested in him. I think Dad just secluded himself from all the possibilities because deep inside he was frightened of feeling loss and pain. I don't know much about his past relationship with my mother, but I have heard it was very toxic. He never really spoke of it much, which is fine. I wish sometimes that he could meet somebody not only to relieve me of having to care for him, but also it could maybe give him some sort of happiness. I knew in my heart, though, he wasn't ever going to do that, and more than likely the course he was running would only end in tragedy, which is what I've been preparing myself for. Now, the reason why I read that and stuff like that, and it was kind of like a big thing, is because that's how I basically felt about everything that was going on in my life. You know, I basically felt like, like my issues with my own mom and stuff like that, like I didn't really want to hear from her. I didn't really care too much about like what was going on with her life. And, I just felt like if you abandon somebody like that, you're not worth wasting your time on. I still feel that way to this day. But the other things in there, I was modeling myself after, like I've said in, multiple things, the characters and stuff, like a lot of them were modeled after me at different points in my life. So with that being said, the way she's describing, how she felt about life, what it's like the overwhelming debt, and then you feel like you want to grow up, and then when you finally do grow up, it's not all like the glamour that you think it's going to be. So, it becomes tough. You have more responsibilities. You're constantly looking out for other things that you never would have expected when you were younger, that you didn't take into account for. So that's her piece on that. And then when she's talking about her relationship with, her dad and stuff like that, there's a lot of times, when you're as a parent and stuff like that and you're working a lot, you come home, you're exhausted. It's hard to find the motivation all the time to go out and do all these glamorous things, especially when you're living paycheck to paycheck. So, you kind of feel bad that, every day isn't a new adventure. Sometimes there's just, if you find most of the time, you're hanging around the house and just spending time together and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, if you're in competition, I guess, with a split custody type thing, you hear like all this fun stuff's going on over here, you want to try to reciprocate that, but there's only so much you can do. So I was writing basically about that too, that constant like dread that I was feeling of not having enough money and stuff to go out and do the things that I wanted to do. I always wanted to like do the adventures and go and do all this stuff, but it was just, being exhausted and being broke, it kind of puts a damper on that. And then, she's talking about her father, there was like women and stuff like that were into him and stuff like that. And he just didn't want to do it and stuff. That was modeled after me. I've been single almost, I don't know, 8 years. So yeah, it was just something that like didn't really interest me. You know what I mean? It wasn't because of lack of availability. It was just more so, I wanted to focus on my own life. And I noticed that, being in relationships and stuff like that, it's not healthy for me. So, you have to find your stride. You have to find what you're about and, kind of go from there with it. And, that's why I put that in the book. And, we're going to be jumping into chapters 11, 12, and 13 next week. And, we're more than we just hit the halfway mark in the story tonight. So, we're rounding the final part of it for the first book. And you're really going to start to see how things get chaotic, with Stella and the other people in her life, everyone that's surrounding her. Things are going to take just a massive, turn and stuff like that. So, what happens is that when we get deeper into the story, I'll be able to give you the full roundabout why I did it this way, why I, chose these themes and stuff like that, and how it's set up for the second book. Because the second book is a lot more detailed than the first book. And the reason being is, one, I was a new author when I wrote this book. I didn't really map out how long I thought it should be. But in the same token, Stella's more of a private person when she's describing her own stuff. Whereas to the main character in the second book, Gwen, is way more open about what's going on. She doesn't care much about anything or what people think about her and stuff. She does have her moments of being self-conscious, but overall she doesn't care. And since it's from her point of view, she's way more open about talking about what's going on in the story. Whereas Stella's more reserved and is more to the point. So that's why the second book also has so much more detail about Gwen's life, because not only is it like her redemption, coming to terms with her, like her past and stuff like that, but also opening up to the people that she should have been open to her entire life. But, there's never an end for redemption. You always have more time in life to make amends and come around and, give back and do all that stuff. So, with that being said, that's all I have for tonight as far as the chapter work goes. However, for next Tuesday, I think what we're going to do is we're going to keep everything to these 8 o'clock live chats. I think that seems to work best as far as everybody logging on schedule, the input I've received so far from the people who constantly watch. So I think we're going to keep it to that 8 o'clock thing. Now, for next week's Tuesday healing, we are going to be talking about, if you haven't seen posted on the TikTok, we're going to be talking about narcissism, gaslighting, love bombing, all the things that go into that toxic style relationship. And I have a lot of good material that we're going to be talking about. It's probably going to run a little longer than our usual ones. So, it'll give more people to jump on. I did put in there, if anyone had wanted to jump on and talk about these things, I welcome you to send me a message so we can set that up and you can certainly join in. I know Stormy's going to be joining in and talking about it. And, a lot of people go through that type of thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person has to be narcissistic in order to be doing things like gaslighting or love bombing. But, people who manipulate and stuff like that, it happens. So, when we're going to be talking about this stuff, you might sit there and say, wow, like, yeah, I've gone through a relationship like this. I've been through something like this. And, it could be helpful because that's what our Tuesday night healings are all about. And we had a really good turnaround last week. We had a lot of people jump on and, I got one message afterwards saying that they were thankful for talking about like different anxiety techniques and stuff, which was great. I'm absolutely thankful for that. So that is what we're going to be doing for Tuesday. Now, I was going to start adding a couple more live streams a week. I'm just trying to get scheduling right and stuff like that. So I think Wednesday, we're going to try something different. I just have to get with Stormy and stuff like that and figure out what direction we want to go in with that. And then every other Friday, I think what we're going to do is we're going to do like a roundtable discussion with basically, if people want to jump on and they want to talk about like things going on in their life and, just daily stuff just to get it out there and, make it happen. I feel like that would be like the perfect opportunity to do so. So just a little more to add to it, get everybody involved and, just be there for everybody. Like I said, we have a couple other things on the docket. Our following week, we're going to go into toxic relationships and co-parenting through them. After that, we are going to be talking about like AA. Stormy is getting ready to talk about autism, so that'll be coming in the next few weeks. So anybody that wants to log on for that, we'll definitely let you guys know when that's coming up. So there's a lot of good things on the horizon. So, thank you guys so much for jumping on and, listening to me rant about this. And, again, if you haven't checked out the books yet, they are on Amazon for 99 cents for the Kindle versions and a little bit more for the physical copies. But, it's a good book. I mean, I'm not saying that because I wrote it, but from the feedback I've gotten and stuff like that, a lot of people seem to have enjoyed it. So, that's all I got for you guys tonight. Thank you so much for joining and, being here with me. And I will see you guys next Tuesday night, Eastern Standard Time, 8:00. And we will get into narcissism, gaslighting, love bombing, relationship chameleon, all that toxic stuff. So I hope you guys have a good night.